Recently, I've been privileged to work with a lot of you in your programs, improving them, making them more effective and more sustainable using the tools of the Early Achievers program. A lot of you know that I've also been a preschool director and teacher. Some of you know that my husband and I homeschooled our children. This is my younger daughter, Ray. We have an older daughter, Zoe. But not very many people here know that most of my early learning years were spent in a very rough, very remote logging camp in the mountains of Idaho. So there was no Melissa and Doug there. There was no Amazon Prime next day delivery of flashcards or Baby Einstein DVDs. It was a long time ago. And still I learned how to count. I learned how to sort big or small. I learned how to skip and gallop and even read before I was ready for us to move to town so that I could go to kindergarten. So how did my parents do this? How did they get me ready for school before Sesame Street was even invented? This question, how do we prepare our children, best prepare our children for kindergarten and everything that lies beyond kindergarten, is debated on every level of our culture right now. We have scores of statistics, case studies, just an ongoing stream of research trying to define that one best practice so that we can prepare all children for school and what comes next. The debate right now seems to be balanced between this academic or play-based. In this corner we have standardized, teacher-led, academic instruction where we're using a lot of materials, relying on teachers who are trained and certified in a specific method or specific curriculum. In the other corner, we have school philosophies that promote play-based learning. They're child-led, they're experiential, and they really rely on nurturing spaces and attentive adults to support the learning. So it's an interesting dichotomy that we see between these two. And we start talking about it, and we start arguing about it, because everybody has their example, their real-life proof of the best way to teach young children. That real-life proof comes from our own programs, perhaps from our own children, but it matters to us because we have seen it. Research is science done in the lab somewhere. Real life happens with children that we really care about. That difference between philosophy or policy and those real life stories, that reality, that's learning. Learning starts with the children, not with the policy and not with the philosophy. So what do we know about how children learn? There's another great article in the New York Times. I was really glad you didn't use that one. It was written by David Dobbs, and he reports that while all young of all species play, none of them play for as much of their life as imaginatively, and neither is their play as protected by the family unit as the human child. Our children are unique in using play to explore hypothetical situations, not just those skills that we need to practice when we're adults. One example is a kitten. A kitten will practice stalking, pouncing on its prey, but it will never practice being a child. A child, on the other hand, is always practicing being a kitten, or a tiger out in the jungle ready to leap out at you. They may even be practicing being the prey, who's struggling or scheming to get away. I have a favorite story I want to tell you about this kind of play. I walked out into the playground one day, and there was a little boy out there, and he was stomping around, and his fists were clenched, and his shoulders were hunched, and his face was just tight and scowling. I said, Hatton, what's going on, buddy? And he tells me, I am not Hatton. I am the giant, and I am going to eat someone. Okay, well, about this time, a 3-year-old little girl comes running through. She is no stranger to drama herself, and she says, I will not be your menu item. I will not be your menu item. She runs off the other way. Hatton kind of ignores her, and he goes up to the top of the climber, and he stops cold. He starts swaying a little bit. So, okay, Hatton, buddy, okay, what's going on? Jack is catching down the beanstalk. And he goes down the slide, and he staggers out in the grass, and he falls backwards. So I go over to him, and his eyes are closed. I said, what happened? The giant is dead. So he sat there for a minute, and I said, what happened next? Jack lived happily ever after. He got up and he ran off. When we see these happening, these stories in our classrooms, in the playground, we know what that is. We naturally, reflexively label it play. But how can we claim that this kind of play is learning? So there's a growing body of evidence now with our unending stream of scientific research, and it clearly shows these narratives develop the vital aspects of literacy and language development. We have identification of characters, creation of coherent storyline, and use of props and contextual descriptions. Does that make sense, right? All of this kind of pretend play, that dramatic, hypothetical, imaginary play, that holds within itself the very foundations of literacy and language development. What about other kinds of learning? So in my house, I was an English major. I love stories better than just about anything, and I fell in love with a scientist. And Jeff would be the first one to say, oh, sure, you can learn language or literacy by playing, but how about the hard stuff? How about math? How about science, engineering? Well, science is proving we can learn that by playing too. Children spend over 50% of their time involved in some sort of math or science play. 25% of the time is spent examining patterns and shapes. Another 25% of the time comparing size. Who has more? Who is bigger? How many do you have? Teacher, she has 2 and I only have 1. 6% explores dynamic change. How do I get this from here over to there? How do I make that look like this? And we have another 7% that talks about where things are, where they are in space, and what they're like. This is like that. It is different from this. The reality is that children are already learning through play. What we as teachers need to do is stay in that zone where we can defend childhood as the place for human children where they have the right and the very real need to play. But at the same time, we need to be accountable for helping them learn those life lessons that we know they're going to need to move out into the world successfully. Okay, how do we do that? Let's look first at our environments. That's a pretty one, huh? I want you to imagine for just a minute 20 kindergartners. And they've been cooped up in their classroom one morning and the teacher says, "We're getting ready to go outside and play." And they all run out there and what? I think they probably run around crazy for a little while, screaming and hollering, using up some of that pent-up energy. Someone might suggest a race. Someone else might suggest a game. But pretty soon, if they're left in this uninspired environment, they're going to move into chaos. Someone's going to poke someone else. Someone's going to grab a hat or a coat and take off with it just to make something interesting happen. So now I want you to imagine the teacher says, "Whoa, I got to do something here. We got to make this more interesting." So she drops a ball into 25-year-olds in that environment. I think our road to chaos just got a lot shorter. So she wants to get us back into that zone where we believe in the right of play, but we know that we are accountable for helping them learn those real life skills. So the teacher says, "Okay, everybody, come together. We're all going to play a game together so we can all play by the same rules, and everybody gets a chance to play with the ball." How many children do you think that one teacher is going to be able to fully engage in the play? How much time is each child going to spend waiting for that one ball to play with? When we are instead deliberate about creating rich environments filled with obstacles, treasures to find, where children have to face their own challenges, find their safe zones, make up their own rules. This is when learning is inevitable. Can we make learning like this as visible in a classroom as it is in a playground? In a playground, we have those ascending levels of physical mastery. They're very obvious. How do we make that same learning visible in a classroom? So let's move back out into this playground. And I want to imagine you now with your group of 5-year-olds inside. And they're all sitting at their desk. And they've all got their pencils. And they've all got their paper. And they're all looking at me. They're ready to learn what? In an environment like this, what do you imagine 25-year-olds are going to learn until the teacher starts dropping things in? Just like she dropped in the one ball. And as they're doing that, how many children is she going to be able to fully engage? Even if the kids remember the information that's dropped in, how many of them got to play with it themselves? How many of them got to toss the idea around to see where it might go for them, what they already know about it? Will they know what to do with that information if it's thrown at them again? Discrete information, when we deliver it as an answer or a fact, that's it. It stops the thought process right there. We don't keep thinking about that information. We store it away for when someone asks us that question again. And we have to pull that answer out and say, "Yes, I did it. I got the answer right." But only when that answer inspires the next question does thought continue moving, continue making connections, looking around. What do I know about this? Do I know something that might answer this question? Working things out on their own. All learning that is truly, truly integrated into a person's self begins with a question to be explored. Teaching is less about providing answers than it is about helping generate really great questions, and then instilling an excitement for the process of thinking through that question, that creative flow that starts when you ask someone, hey, have you ever seen a pumpkin this big? If you think of that same classroom, 25-year-olds, you're going to end up with 30 answers about a pumpkin that big. But if you tell them, this pumpkin weighs 332 pounds. Okay. So I want to go to our next slide here. Think about your classroom. Think about that classroom now with this kind of look. So we've got those 20 kids sitting in a classroom. What do you want to drop into that? One answer or one really great question? A lot of policy asks us not only to drop the answers in, but to keep reinforcing those answers until the kids are able to pull the answers out in exactly the same shape they went in. Imagine if we could instead show the whole great big playground that children will naturally create with bits and pieces of information that they receive when they're allowed to stack it up and twist it around and shape it into their own understanding of the subject. This is our true mission as teachers, not to train children to give us back the information that we gave out to them, but to document and articulate how they use that information to move through it and over it and around it to something we never expected them to learn. So if we're documenting those questions, learning how to document that first comments after the big question. And I don't know about you guys, but I go through circles sometimes and I'll think, oh man, where did this start? Because this is going somewhere great. And you start trying to remember what the initial prompt was. Try to get more practice about hearing that question and listening for the next step that goes through it. I'm going to stop with the notes right there because there's a great example. And it's a bit controversial. Sorry, I'm messing up my tech helper here. And we had free play one day at the block section, and I heard a group of kids arguing about whether a man and a man could get married, or if a woman and a woman could get married. And I thought, oh, I'm not touching this one. Stepped right back out of it, and I kept listening and kept listening as the conversation got more and more and more heated. And I wondered, okay, how am I going to approach this with 5 to 3-year-olds? And all of a sudden, I heard the oldest child, who was the most heated about this, stand up and say, you have to hear me and believe me because I'm the oldest, so I'm the smartest, and that's the way it is. It had nothing to do with what I was scared to talk to the kids about. It had to do about who was oldest and who was smartest. So we spent a very productive circle talking about exactly that. What does smart mean? What makes you smart? My daughter Ray here knows how to fly airplanes, but I was still teaching her how to drive a car. I'm older. Don't know how to fly airplanes. All the kids agreed that it was harder to fly an airplane. I should be able to know how to do that. So it was a great moment of waiting until you hear the question and then stepping in and knowing how to go with it. Practice that. Respect that kids have unique ways of perceiving the same question. Perfect example. And testing their theories. Not all kids are going to test a math question with pen and paper, or even your little counting bears. Some of them are going to want to write a story about it, draw a picture about it. Celebrate the unique observations that each child has as you're practicing through that question by bringing them back together to report and reflect on what they learned. In the end, what you're going to end up with is a group of 20 kids who don't just know one answer. They know a rich, complex, multi-layered, they have a relationship with that initial subject that you begin talking about. Okay, down there. So I'd like to close this with a quote from one of the kings of play. This was a quote that my older daughter Zoe chose for her senior motto. Now Zoe was homeschooled from the time that she was born through graduating high school. And when she graduated high school, she was awarded the Ford Family Foundation Scholarship in Oregon. She was one of 104 students who received a full ride scholarship to any college in the state of Oregon. And should she maintain a 3.6 average while in college, she will also receive 2 years of grad school scholarships from that. Relani here has been my tech helper tonight. Next year, she'll simultaneously graduate from high school and WWCC, where she currently has a 3.94 GPA. And she'll go on to, let's see, we've got criminal justice or psychology or linguistics. She's still playing with her options there. And that's kind of the point of this whole thing, is that playing is learning. And when we trust ourselves and we trust the kids, we can see that. We as teachers can become fluent in documenting that learning so that everybody else can see it as well. Thank you.
I did forget something really, really important, and that was to thank all the folks that helped put this event together. So